I wanted to talk a little bit about the mind-muscle connection in this week's Bro Science Academy. It's something I've been thinking a lot as I've done more training sessions with Mike O'Hearn. We'll do exercises that are a little bit unconventional, right? Now, we start off lifting heavy with the compound movements. We start off doing, for example, the other day we're doing shoulders and we do a behind the neck press. I go up to 195, Mike goes up to 245. Everything's slow, controlled, deliberate, 2 to 3 reps. Come to a complete stop before you engage on the next rep. Perfect form, but still going heavy. Merging those two things in what he calls power bodybuilding. Then we go on to the auxiliaries, and I guess this is just something that perhaps as a beginner, as somebody learning to lift weights, the mind-muscle connection idea, it can be overrated because you ask a bodybuilder, like, what's the most important thing? Mind-muscle connection. I don't count reps. I don't look at the weight. That's all BS to some degree because ultimately you have to keep track of what you're doing. If you don't care about the weights at all, well, how can you progress? How can you know what you're doing? And if you don't inherently enjoy just lifting the weights, there's no enjoyment in it and you end up just going through the motions. However, if you're not checking in with yourself to say, do I feel this movement in the targeted area, then you're also not going to be making any progress. So Mike showed me a few moves that I feel like for the first time, for example, in my traps, I gave a variation the other day of like a bent over shrug with dumbbells. We did another one that was a behind the back shrug with a barbell where you have a relatively close grip, hip width grip, and you're pulling it up with your elbows. You ever shrugged this high behind your back? It looks like something you shouldn't be able to do. However, you can feel the contraction in your traps, and it ends up being like, holy shit, I'm sore in places that I've never been sore before. He had us do a lat pull down where you're sitting, imagine you're sitting a lat pull down, then reverse it so you're facing backwards and you lay your back down where your knees would normally go under. I don't know if that makes sense, but you end up kind of like this and the thing's behind you, right? And you stick your legs out and your butt out. So like if you're pulling too hard too quick, you would actually pull yourself up, right? So it takes away your ability to use any momentum. And this contraction, for example, I'm pulling it and it's like, it's actually kind of hard to get like close to your chest. It's a really awkward contraction. But if you pull into that, you feel it in your rear delt like I've never felt before. I don't really even feel it when I'm doing, for example, a rear delt fly with the machine, the reverse pec deck, or a dumbbell. But in this particular instance, it's like, oh, damn, that works. I've been feeling that. And so you ask Mike and you go like, where do you come up with this stuff? He'll attribute it to, I learned this from Arnold or I learned this from Lou Ferrigno or whatever. But a lot of these things, I'm like, I get the feeling you've personally experimented and come up with certain things just through you're there for decades. You're there doing this thing and you make little tweaks and see what works. And he's like, yes, that's true. So I decided to take that on. I have an issue in my pec and basically from my shoulder issue, right? Pressing doesn't quite contract the entire pec muscle the way I wanted to. I have this imbalance, but I noticed that when I do like a dumbbell pullover, I got this pump under here in the pec minor, right? That kind of gave my pec a volume that I have in my stronger pec that I never had here. So I'm like, how can I merge those two? And it was on my mind, like many problems are when you're, asking yourself something. I feel like people come up with creative solutions to problems by posing the question, and then at some point it gets answered. So yes, I'm building this all up just to say, I came up with a new exercise. I'm between two cable stacks. I didn't grab the handles, right? Imagine I'm like on my knees between these two things, right? And if the line is here, if I'm pulling straight down and it's like this, I'm actually going behind that on my knees and pulling no handles, just like the black ball, pulling black balls into myself, right? So I'm going like this and I'm pulling into myself, right? You see that? Ooh, and you feel that contraction right there. I've never seen anybody do this, but it's predicated on the notion of I'm going around and going, where can I feel that muscle contract? From what angle, from what position? And then replicating that with the tools that I have. Now, you can all do that yourself, but also take any exercise that you do and take that principle and go, do I feel it in the target muscle group? Is this the proper range of motion? Is there more tension at a certain spot? Like some people do curls and it's like the rest up here, or, in a bicep curl that you're standing on, you can change the arc of the tension by leaning forward a little bit, by leaning back, right? These are all things that I do like set to set, exercise to exercise, and it makes all the difference in the world. You can easily cheat yourself or convince yourself, oh, I'm doing something, I'm making this rep harder, I'm keeping constant tension, or doing a full range of motion, even though you're taking the tension off the muscle. I mean, like, I'm going up here, then taking a second to rest and coming back down. That's just an example from bicep curls. But one thing that Mike showed me, we're doing front raises. And it's something as simple as front raises, right? That you assume you know how to do. Everybody knows how to do a front raise because you can just look at it and go, oh, you go up to here, you go up to here, you go up to here. And he goes, what about coming higher? And it's like, duh. Right? When you come all the way up here, first of all, a lot of people have mobility issues where, the sign of a healthy shoulder is, can you get your bicep past your ear? A lot of people can't. Casey's like, oh, boom!
I want to try.
Yeah. But you'll see a lot of this, how they test, your mobility. And for example, on my bad shoulder, it's just a little bit off, right? So this is still a difficult position, and I want to create tension in that difficult position with not a lot of weight, but maybe I'm holding a 20, and instead of stopping here, I'm going up to here and challenging myself to hold it in that position, and that's also going to help on things like my high inclines or whatever. I realize, that's a weak position that I need to work on. Similar thing with any of the stuff that you've looked at from knees over toes guy, where it's all about putting yourself in a weaker position, a more vulnerable position that maybe you injured yourself in, extending that knee, in a reference to the title of his channel, extending the knee over the toes, even though you're told not to do that, putting yourself in a compromised, vulnerable, weak position, and then gradually strengthening up from there, right? So that's a principle that you can always. Lifting heavy weights with perfect form is great, but also do these things where you drop the weight a lot. And that's the interesting juxtaposition, to use my favorite word of all time, between working with a guy like Mike. You go, we're heavy, we're doing heavy squats, heavy presses, heavy things, exercises to lead off, but then we go really light with perfect form and make small tweaks that amplify the tension that you're feeling in the muscle. And maybe you should do that yourself. Oh my goodness gracious.